There comes a point in every woman's life when she finally stops begging to be understood, valued, or chosen, and instead she chooses herself. And that moment is when everything changes. That moment, that's when men start to take notice, not because she's louder, not because she's more available, but because she's emotionally detached. And let's make one thing clear. Detachment doesn't mean cold. It doesn't mean heartless. It means power. It means peace. It means not allowing your identity to revolve around someone else's validation. The truth is, men can't resist a woman who's emotionally detached. Not because she's playing games, but because she's no longer playing herself. She's no longer trying to convince someone of her worth. She knows her worth. And that silent confidence is louder than any desperate plea for attention ever could be. Most women spend a large portion of their lives believing that the more emotionally available they are, the more lovable they become. They pour their hearts out, thinking that vulnerability guarantees connection. They think that if they just show how much they care, how deeply they love, how endlessly they're willing to give, then the man they desire will finally see them, choose them, and never let them go. But the reality is often the complete opposite. Life has a way of teaching hard lessons. Over time, a woman begins to notice that all the emotional transparency, the late night conversations, the tears, the forgiveness, the endless understanding, it's often not reciprocated. It's not met with gratitude. It's met with indifference. She starts to question what she's doing wrong. She asks herself why her loyalty isn't valued, why her heart isn't enough, why her efforts keep going unnoticed. The truth is, in many cases, it's not about how much she gives. It's about how little she requires. And that becomes the trap. She gives without requiring respect. She loves without boundaries. She shows up with open arms and receives inconsistency in return. This imbalance sends a silent message that her emotions are available on demand, that her heart can be accessed at any time, without effort, without commitment, without accountability. But there comes a moment in a woman's journey when she gets tired. Not bitter, not cold, but done. Done with the cycle of emotional dependency. Done with waiting for a text, for an apology, for a change that never comes. And it's in this quiet breaking point that the shift happens. A subtle internal switch flips, and everything begins to change. She stops reaching out first. She stops over-explaining. She stops over-analyzing. She stops adjusting her behavior to win someone else's affection, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. It's not a game. It's not manipulation. It's realization. She finally sees that her peace is too expensive to be disrupted by someone who doesn't know what to do with her heart. That's when the emotional detachment begins. But this detachment isn't about apathy. It's about clarity. It's about choosing not to be emotionally entangled with someone who hasn't earned that right. It's about pulling her energy back, not to punish, but to preserve. And the moment she does, everything shifts, not just within her, but around her. Men begin to notice, not because she's louder or more seductive, not because she's chasing or showing off, but because she's no longer emotionally available on their terms. She's not waiting for attention. She's not trying to prove herself. She's not emotionally reacting to every breadcrumb of interest. Her detachment makes her presence more powerful. Men are not wired to respond to emotional overload. They're wired to respond to presence, energy, and confidence. And an emotionally detached woman carries herself with an energy that is impossible to ignore. Her detachment sends a message. I choose me. I don't need you to make me feel complete. I'm already whole. And that kind of woman becomes intriguing. She becomes mysterious. She becomes magnetic. This doesn't happen because she's trying to be mysterious. It happens because she's no longer performing. She's no longer trying to earn her place in someone else's life. She's observing, she's listening, she's watching whether his words match his actions. She's not ignoring red flags for the sake of potential. She's not lowering her standards just to feel loved for a moment. Her emotional detachment allows her to see clearly, choose wisely, and act decisively. What was once a pattern of overgiving turns into a practice of self-respect. What was once fear of being alone becomes freedom in her own space. What was once chasing becomes attracting, because the truth is, the moment she detaches from the outcome is the moment she becomes most powerful. It's the silence that speaks the loudest. It's the non-reaction that shakes him. It's the absence of emotional dependence that makes him stop and wonder. When she's no longer emotionally available, when she's no longer investing where there is no return, he feels that shift in his bones. He may not have valued her presence before, but he feels the weight of her absence now. When a woman detaches emotionally, she begins to operate from a place of strength rather than need. She no longer views love as something to earn or win. She understands that love, real love, is mutual, balanced, and respectful. That understanding shifts everything about how she moves. She's no longer anxious about how she's being perceived or constantly questioning her worth based on someone else's inconsistent attention. She starts anchoring herself in her own validation. She knows who she is, and she doesn't need anyone to confirm it for her. This kind of woman becomes rare. She's no longer caught in the endless loop of trying to decode mixed signals or wasting energy on people who aren't emotionally mature enough to communicate directly. She doesn't cling to the idea of potential. She's not interested in fixing anyone, changing anyone, or waiting around for someone to grow into the person she needs. She's done romanticizing red flags and justifying bad behavior. And that kind of clarity is dangerous to people who once depended on her emotional availability. Men who once took her for granted start to feel unsettled, not because she's being cold or distant in a petty way, but because she's no longer reactive. She doesn't text back instantly. She doesn't rush to solve every problem or smooth over every disagreement. She doesn't plead or explain herself unnecessarily. Her emotional silence creates space, and in that space, a man is forced to sit with himself. He's no longer being emotionally coddled or comforted. He's confronted with the reality of what he's been giving or not giving. That confrontation becomes uncomfortable for him. He starts to realize that he's no longer in control of the emotional rhythm. He can no longer predict her reactions because she's stopped giving them. That lack of emotional feedback removes the power he once had. The buttons he used to press don't work anymore. The patterns he used to rely on no longer apply. She has shifted, and he can feel it. What's interesting is that this shift doesn't require drama. It doesn't need loud declarations or grand gestures. It's quiet, it's subtle, and yet it's incredibly powerful. Because emotional detachment is not about pretending not to care. It's about genuinely choosing not to pour energy into places that don't nourish her. It's about emotional discipline. And that's something many people underestimate. A woman who can control her emotions, especially in the presence of someone she once deeply cared about, becomes a force to be reckoned with. She no longer reacts out of fear, attachment, or insecurity. She doesn't try to chase closure or prove her worth. She lets go, not because she doesn't care, but because she values herself more than she values being chosen by someone who doesn't deserve her. This emotional control elevates her. It changes how she speaks, how she walks, how she looks at the world. There's a calm confidence in her that makes her presence heavy in the best way. It's not arrogance. It's awareness. It's knowing what she brings to the table and refusing to negotiate that for temporary affection or validation. Men, consciously or unconsciously, are drawn to this energy. They sense that she's different, that she can't be manipulated emotionally, that she won't tolerate inconsistency, that she's not going to invest in something that isn't mutually fulfilling. She becomes the kind of woman who raises the bar without even saying a word, and that quiet standard she sets forces him to level up or lose access completely. Because now she's not afraid to walk away. She doesn't beg for love. She doesn't tolerate disrespect. She doesn't stay where she's not valued. Her detachment makes it clear that she'll no longer participate in her own heartbreak, that she'll no longer sacrifice her peace for someone else's comfort. And in doing so, she reclaims her power. When she used to overgive, she thought it was love. When she used to explain herself repeatedly, she thought it was clarity. When she used to wait for apologies or change behavior, she thought it was loyalty. But now she understands none of that was love if it wasn't reciprocated. None of that was clarity if it wasn't respected. None of that was loyalty if it was one-sided. Her detachment shows that she's learned the lesson. She's learned that sometimes the most powerful move is not to say anything at all, not to argue, not to plead, not to over-explain, just to pause, observe, and decide. She's in control now, not of others, but of herself. And that is where her true power lies. There's something undeniably powerful about a woman who no longer allows her emotions to be dictated by someone else's inconsistency. She doesn't chase after clarity because she no longer needs it from someone who can't give it freely. Instead, she creates clarity within herself. She doesn't overthink why he changed, why he pulled away, why he stopped trying, because now she understands that someone's inability to show up isn't a reflection of her worth, but a reflection of their own emotional immaturity. That realization sets her free. It cuts the invisible rope that had her tied to false hope and empty promises. Emotional detachment isn't coldness, it's wisdom. It's the result of having cared too deeply for too long and realizing that emotional chaos isn't proof of love. It's emotional intelligence to step back and say, I deserve peace more than I deserve potential. She stops making excuses for him. She stops interpreting silence as a test and mixed signals as mystery. She no longer romanticizes confusion. Now, she sees clarity as the bare minimum and emotional consistency as a requirement, not a bonus. When she detaches emotionally, her entire energy changes. She doesn't ask, what did I do wrong anymore? Instead, she asks, why was I okay with being treated that way? She redirects the questions inward, not to blame herself, but to empower herself, because now she's not trying to figure out how to get him back. She's figuring out how to never lose herself again. She rebuilds the connection with herself that was broken by constantly pouring into someone who never truly filled her back up. Her time alone becomes sacred. She realizes that solitude isn't loneliness, it's protection. It's healing, it's her sanctuary, where she recalibrates her standards, her identity, and her emotional boundaries. She's not just recovering from heartbreak, she's evolving into a version of herself that no longer allows heartbreak to define her. Her silence becomes strength, her calm becomes power, her peace becomes her priority. And it's in that space, in that peace, that her energy begins to shift in a way that men can't help but notice. Not because she's doing anything intentionally, but because emotional detachment makes her unpredictable. She no longer reacts the same way. She doesn't respond with desperation, with questions, or with endless second chances. That emotional gap she creates forces people to see her differently. She's no longer the woman they assumed would always be there, waiting, hoping, hurting silently. The absence of emotional availability from a woman who used to give everything leaves a lasting impression. Suddenly, her lack of response is louder than any words she could have spoken. Her distance becomes a mirror, forcing others to face themselves without the buffer of her emotional labor. And for many men, that absence becomes uncomfortable. It challenges them. It reveals what they were taking for granted. It shakes the illusion that they could always come and go as they pleased. Men are often used to emotional access. They're used to women explaining, reacting, fixing, and forgiving. But when a woman removes all that, when she chooses silence instead of confrontation, boundaries instead of pleading, and distance instead of attachment, it flips the dynamic completely. It forces a man to decide whether he will rise to meet her level or fall away. There is no middle ground anymore. And it's not that she doesn't care. It's that she cares too much about herself now to keep showing up for someone who never chose her fully. Her emotional detachment is a declaration. I'm not here to convince you of my value. I'm not here to make you see me. I'm here to see myself clearly and protect the version of me I've worked so hard to become. That kind of self-possession is rare and it's magnetic. It draws attention, respect, and curiosity from the very people who once overlooked her, because now she's a mystery. Not because she's hiding, but because she's glowing from within. She's inaccessible to chaos. She's uninterested in drama. She's unavailable to emotional games. Her time, her mind, her heart, they are no longer for sale at the cost of her dignity. And that aura of self-respect changes everything about how people approach her. She becomes the woman they talk about long after she's gone. The one they didn't appreciate until she detached. The one whose absence taught them everything her presence tried to say. There comes a point when a woman's silence speaks louder than her presence ever did. She no longer feels the need to explain herself or prove her worth to someone who couldn't see it when it was right in front of them. She stops trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding her. She's not bitter. She's not angry. She's just done. And that quiet resolve becomes the most powerful response of all. She's detached, not because she no longer has emotions, but because she's finally learned to protect them. What used to break her now builds her. What used to keep her awake at night now barely touches her soul. That transformation is what makes her unforgettable. Men often don't realize the damage they cause until the emotional connection is gone. While she was emotionally invested, available, expressive, he felt in control. He knew how to pull her back with the right words, the minimal effort, the occasional attention. He never had to work hard to keep her because she was always right there, loyal, forgiving, trying. But when she emotionally detaches, when she no longer lights up at his name or reacts to his messages, he begins to feel a shift he can't ignore. He realizes he's lost something valuable, not because she told him, but because he can feel it in the absence of her energy. She stops being predictable. She's no longer waiting by the phone, checking her messages, hoping for a change. She's too busy rebuilding herself, reconnecting with her passions, discovering who she is without the weight of someone else's inconsistency. Her world expands while his starts to shrink. He may not understand the depth of what he had until it's no longer responding to him. And that's the truth. Most men face too late. They miss her when she's no longer emotionally accessible, when her love is no longer a guarantee, when her presence becomes a memory instead of a comfort. What once was a routine for him, a quick message, a brief call, a casual "I miss you" just to keep her close, is now met with silence, not out of revenge, but out of evolution. She's grown past the point of needing crumbs of affection. She's realized that her emotions are sacred, and not everyone deserves access to them. Her detachment isn't cold, it's calculated, it's intentional, it's rooted in self-worth. She finally sees herself as someone who doesn't need to be chosen to be valuable. She was always valuable. She just forgot that while trying to be enough for someone else. And now she's a completely different woman. She walks differently. Her energy is grounded. Her peace is non-negotiable. She doesn't argue anymore. She doesn't chase closure. She doesn't need to be right. She knows that real closure doesn't come from someone else. It comes from within. It comes when she decides that she deserves more than unanswered questions and emotional roller coasters. She no longer lives in the past or in the fantasy of who someone could be. She's firmly planted in the present, moving forward with purpose. Men can sense this shift. They feel the distance, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. They reach out and realize they're no longer speaking to the same version of her they once knew. Her replies are shorter, her energy is reserved, her boundaries are firm. She's no longer emotionally available for confusion, chaos, or inconsistency. She's become selective with her heart, with her time, with her presence. That scarcity makes her more valuable in their eyes, but by then, it's not about them anymore, it's about her. She doesn't detach to make him miss her. She detaches because she finally stopped missing herself. She stopped missing the version of herself who tolerated less, settled for crumbs, and cried over temporary people. She started choosing herself in the smallest, quietest ways, by saying no, by staying silent, by walking away when things no longer served her growth. And those choices built a woman who no longer needs to be saved, validated, or completed. She's whole on her own. That kind of woman is not just attractive, she's unforgettable. She becomes the one that lives in the back of his mind, the one that changed him without even trying, the one whose absence lingers longer than any other presence ever did. Not because of what she said or did, but because of who she became once she let go. Her detachment became her power, and that power made her the kind of woman no man can resist, but only if he's ready to meet her at the level she now lives on. When a woman detaches emotionally, she stops playing the game. She's no longer interested in strategy, no longer trying to win someone over. She's not calculating her responses or overanalyzing his every word. Instead, she finds peace in being authentic, in standing in her truth without the weight of constantly proving it. She understands now that chasing connection with someone who doesn't value it is a slow form of self-abandonment. She's done with the cycle of overinvesting, overthinking, and overextending herself for someone who gave her half-hearted effort. That clarity transforms her from a woman seeking love into a woman who embodies it, especially self-love. The emotional gap she creates isn't just silence, it's space. And in that space, something powerful happens. She begins to hear her own voice again. She remembers her dreams, her desires, her value. She reconnects with her intuition, which was once drowned out by the noise of trying to be enough for someone else. She starts pouring her energy into herself. Her beauty shifts from appearance to presence. She glows differently, walks differently, breathes differently, and the world, especially men, begin to feel the shift too. There's something captivating about a woman who isn't emotionally dependent on attention, affection, or approval. She's not withholding emotions to be cruel. She's not playing hard to get. She's simply become a woman who knows her emotional energy is priceless and doesn't give it away freely anymore. Her emotional boundaries are now like sacred ground. Only those who approach with respect, consistency, and truth are allowed in, and this new standard filters out the weak. Men who once relied on charm or manipulation find themselves powerless. The tactics that used to reel her in no longer work. She sees through the illusion. She's not interested in temporary comfort if it costs her long-term peace. A woman who detaches emotionally doesn't do so overnight. It's often the result of deep emotional exhaustion. She didn't just wake up one day and decide to feel nothing. She felt everything, too much for too long. She gave, forgave, waited, hoped. She believed in words that were never followed by actions. She gave chances long after she should have walked away. But eventually her spirit grew tired, not bitter. Just done. Done begging for the bare minimum. Done shrinking herself for someone else's comfort. Done hurting herself in the name of loyalty. That exhaustion didn't harden her heart. It sharpened her focus. And once she's detached, everything becomes clear. She sees the relationship for what it truly was, not for what she wished it would be. She stops blaming herself for things she tolerated in the name of love. She forgives herself for staying too long, for caring too much, for losing pieces of herself along the way. And that forgiveness births freedom. She no longer needs closure from him. because she gave it to herself. She no longer waits for a message, a call, or a sign because she stopped needing permission to move on. Men feel this shift deeply, especially the ones who were never asked to give more. They feel it in her silence, in her distance, in her emotional independence. Suddenly, the attention they once dismissed becomes a memory they can't shake. Her voice echoes differently in their minds. Her absence becomes a presence of its own. They realize too late that the version of her who once loved them unconditionally no longer exists. She evolved. She became a woman who loves from abundance, not desperation. A woman who can still feel deeply, but only for those who meet her energy. This transformation isn't loud. It doesn't come with revenge or theatrics. It comes with peace, with knowing that she's no longer afraid to be alone, because she's no longer lonely when by herself. She enjoys her own company, her own progress, her own journey. Her glow becomes internal. She shines from a place of healing, not needing. And that internal glow creates external power, an unshakable presence that draws people in without her having to try. Men can't resist this kind of woman, not because she plays games, but because she doesn't, because she's rare, because emotional detachment, when done from a place of self-respect, makes her unforgettable. She's no longer emotionally reactive, and that makes her emotionally mysterious. Her energy says, I choose me. And in a world that teaches women to always give, always compromise, always endure, a woman who chooses herself becomes the most magnetic force of all. Something profound happens when a woman reclaims her emotional independence. She becomes a mirror, not just any mirror, but one that reflects back a man's true intentions, his emotional maturity, and his ability to step up. She's no longer moved by promises, only by patterns. She doesn't respond to potential anymore. She responds to presence. She stopped fantasizing about what a man could be and started evaluating who he actually is in real time. And that mirror is uncomfortable for many men because it forces them to face their own inconsistencies without the cushion of her emotional availability to soften the truth. She's not trying to punish anyone. Her emotional detachment isn't about revenge. It's about revelation. It's about revealing what happens when she no longer fills the emotional space with effort, empathy, or explanation. When she stops trying to connect, the gaps become visible. The imbalance becomes undeniable. It becomes obvious who is doing the emotional labor, who is carrying the weight of communication, who is making the relationship function on a deeper level. And that's when reality hits for many men, not when she argued or cried, but when she became indifferent. That indifference isn't an act, it's earned. It's cultivated through experiences that taught her she doesn't need to lose herself to prove her love. She doesn't have to tolerate hot and cold behavior just to feel wanted. She doesn't have to be the emotional caregiver to someone who never considered her needs. She's outgrown emotional turbulence. She no longer views love as struggle or pain as proof of passion. She's built her peace, and anything that threatens it is no longer welcome, no matter how attractive the person or how familiar the pattern. Her emotional detachment becomes a test. Unintentionally, it draws out the truth in others. The men who were there for the thrill of control begin to pull away because they can't manipulate her responses anymore. The ones who thrived on her emotional reactions begin to grow frustrated because they no longer have power. And the ones who genuinely care, who are emotionally mature and ready, step forward with clarity, intention, and respect. Because only the secure can handle a woman who doesn't need them to complete her. She's not emotionally numb. She's emotionally discerning. She still feels, but she no longer bleeds for people who wouldn't do the same for her. She still loves, but she doesn't beg. She still desires connection, but not at the cost of her self-respect. Her detachment isn't emptiness, it's elevation. She's risen above the level of emotional games, of toxic cycles, of performative affection. She's not waiting for someone to validate her existence. She validates herself every day by honoring her boundaries, prioritizing her mental health, and showing up for herself in ways others never did. That shift in her energy is magnetic. It's the kind of power that draws men in, not because she's trying, but because she's not. She's become unpredictable in the best way. Not because she's playing hard to get, but because she's genuinely not available for anything that doesn't feel right to her soul. She doesn't entertain half love. She doesn't respond to "what are you doing" texts at midnight. She doesn't allow access to people who only show up when it's convenient. Her time is earned now. Her heart is protected. Men can sense when a woman has detached emotionally. It's not just in what she says. It's in what she no longer says. She stops explaining her worth. She stops justifying her decisions. She stops hoping they'll change. That silence, that peace, it carries weight. It lingers. And it often makes more impact than any confrontation ever could. Because when a woman who once gave her all becomes reserved, her absence becomes a presence that haunts the room. She becomes the woman who can't be manipulated, guilted, or swayed. She becomes the one who got away, not because she disappeared, but because she transformed. She didn't walk away to hurt anyone. She walked away to heal herself. She didn't become distant to punish someone. She became distant to reconnect with herself. And once that connection to herself is restored, she's no longer accessible to relationships that ask her to disconnect from her truth just to keep the peace. Her emotional detachment is not the end of her ability to love. It's the beginning of a new standard, a standard where her love is no longer free for those who don't respect it, a standard where her presence is a gift, not a guarantee, a standard that doesn't allow confusion, inconsistency, or emotional immaturity to exist within her space. And that standard doesn't just attract respect, it demands it, because the woman who has detached emotionally is no longer waiting to be chosen. She's already chosen herself. When a woman detaches emotionally, she starts operating from a place of clarity, not confusion. Her mind becomes sharp, her decisions intentional, and her actions purposeful. She's no longer reacting from emotion, she's responding from awareness. She doesn't let people pull her back into cycles of chaos because she finally sees them for who they truly are, not for who she hoped they would become. This level of discernment makes her powerful. Because when a woman detaches, she stops entertaining things that insult her intelligence or her heart. She doesn't ask questions she already knows the answers to. She doesn't give chances to those who've already shown her who they are. What makes this woman so unforgettable is the peace she starts radiating. There's no drama, no begging, no chaos, just quiet strength. It's the way she carries herself now with dignity, grace, and unwavering self-respect. She's not loud about her transformation, but it's evident in everything she does, in how she talks, how she listens, how she removes herself from situations that no longer feel aligned. And men can feel that shift deeply, where once there was emotion to manipulate, now there's space they can't seem to enter. She doesn't hate them. She just no longer needs them the way she once did. And that is when regret begins to set in for many men. They start to remember the version of her who cared deeply, who reached out first, who forgave easily, who believed in their potential. But now she no longer gives them access to that version. It wasn't taken away out of cruelty. It faded when it stopped being appreciated. That kind of emotional detachment is not temporary. It becomes a new baseline for how she lives, how she loves, and how she protects her spirit. She's not bitter, she's boundaried. And those boundaries make her rare. What men often misunderstand is that emotional detachment isn't coldness, it's healing. It's what happens when a woman finally realizes that her emotions are not public property, that not everyone deserves her vulnerability, her softness, her nurturing. She used to feel guilty for pulling away. Now she feels empowered by it. She used to explain why she was hurt. Now she simply removes herself from anything that threatens her peace. That quiet exit, that graceful withdrawal, it's not weakness, it's wisdom. She learned that staying where she's not valued costs more than walking away ever will. This kind of detachment doesn't make her less loving, it makes her more selective. She's still capable of great love, deep connection, and fierce loyalty, but she no longer offers those things to people who treat them like options. She's not asking anyone to choose her anymore. She's not proving her worth. She's not lowering her standards to meet someone at their comfort level. She's elevated herself, and now only those who are willing to rise with her can access her emotionally. She has learned to choose people who choose her fully, consistently, and without hesitation. Men begin to reflect on the moments they took for granted, the messages she sent, the support she offered, the patience she showed. Now that those things are no longer there, they start to realize the depth of what they lost. They scroll through old conversations, reread the words she once wrote, try to revisit the energy she once gave freely, but nothing hits harder than the realization that she didn't leave because she stopped loving. She left because she finally loved herself more. She's not emotionally cold, she's emotionally evolved. She feels more than ever, but only for those who've proven they can handle the weight of her heart. She doesn't hold grudges, she simply no longer entertains people who can't show up fully. Her forgiveness is silent, her closure is internal. She doesn't chase explanations or apologies. She's done hoping for people to change. She's focused on growth, healing, and surrounding herself with energy that's reciprocal, not draining. The emotional detachment she's embraced becomes her protection, her filter, her compass. It helps her navigate the world without losing herself. She's no longer afraid of losing people. She's afraid of losing her peace. And that shift changes everything. Now, men can't stop thinking about her, not because she's trying to make them, but because her absence reveals a truth they refused to see when she was present. She becomes the one that got away, not because she was unreachable, but because they couldn't rise to meet her when she was still reachable. What was once taken for granted is now deeply missed, but she's no longer waiting to be missed. She's living her life, rooted in confidence, flowing with grace, aligned with her worth. She's not afraid to start over. She's not afraid to be alone because she knows that detachment doesn't mean the end of love. It means the beginning of love for herself. And from that place, only the best connections can grow. A woman who is detached emotionally carries a different energy. It's not just what she says or does, it's what she no longer entertains. She's moved beyond chasing validation, beyond seeking answers from people who never intended to give them. She doesn't linger in confusion or cling to what could have been. Instead, she walks in clarity. And that clarity is disarming to those who once had power over her emotions. She no longer reacts with desperation. She responds with distance. And that distance is what captivates people the most, especially men who were used to her softness, her warmth, her effort. What they once overlooked now becomes unforgettable. The very things they dismissed, the way she used to listen intently, support endlessly, and love unconditionally, begin to echo in their memory. But now, all of that is gone. She's not punishing them. She simply no longer has emotional space for one-sided investment. Her silence replaces her pleading. Her peace replaces her pain. Her absence says everything she once tried to say with words they never truly heard. And that change, it lingers, it haunts, because now they realize they can no longer access the emotional world she once invited them into so freely. Men find themselves replaying moments, revisiting old conversations, trying to figure out where they lost her. But they didn't lose her in a single moment. They lost her gradually. Every time they ignored her efforts, dismissed her emotions, or made her feel like she was asking for too much when she only wanted basic respect. They lost her each time they gave her inconsistency and expected loyalty in return. They lost her every time they assumed she'd always be there. And now, faced with her emotional detachment, they're left to confront what they couldn't see before. She was never weak. She was just hoping they'd rise with her. They didn't. So she detached and rose alone. This version of her is powerful, not because she holds back love, but because she no longer gives it away without discernment. She's not withholding to hurt anyone. She's just learned to protect herself. She doesn't move out of fear. She moves with intention. She's no longer impressed by temporary charm, loud gestures, or empty promises. She watches actions, not words. Consistency, not chemistry, is what holds her attention. She knows who she is, she knows what she brings, and she won't lower her standards to fit into someone else's comfort zone. And it's precisely this shift that makes her magnetic. She doesn't need to manipulate anyone to stay. She doesn't try to prove her worth anymore. She lets people show who they are. And when they show they're not ready, she doesn't argue. She simply lets them go. That calm detachment is the strongest message of all. It tells the world that her peace is not for sale, that her heart is not a playground, that she's done performing emotional labor for people who won't meet her halfway. And that message, it's felt more deeply than any words could convey. Men are naturally drawn to the woman who doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't try to fix or convince. She becomes a mystery, not because she hides who she is, but because she's no longer trying to be understood by those who never cared to understand her in the first place. She shows up differently, not guarded, but guided. She guards her heart not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. She knows what it cost her to love without boundaries. She remembers the exhaustion of giving too much. And now she chooses peace over proving herself. She no longer wants love that consumes her. She wants love that complements her. She's not chasing butterflies or sparks. She's seeking safety, emotional depth, and mutual growth. And unless a man can match that energy, she doesn't invite him into her world. Her detachment becomes her strength, and in that strength, she becomes irresistible because she doesn't make herself available to just anyone. She doesn't bend anymore. She doesn't compromise her standards for the illusion of connection. She becomes the kind of woman who makes a man evaluate himself, not because she asked him to change, but because her presence demands authenticity. She makes him think, not just feel. She makes him question the parts of himself that were content with shallow connection. Her detachment forces a deeper look inward, and only the emotionally mature can handle what they see. She's no longer moved by temporary pleasure. She's aligned with long-term purpose. And that level of alignment isn't easy to find, nor is it easy to forget. So while she may no longer express love the way she once did, her emotional evolution leaves an impact far greater than her vulnerability ever did. Men realize too late that her detachment wasn't indifference. It was the final act of self-respect. And from that place, she rises quietly, gracefully, unapologetically. There comes a moment in every emotionally detached woman's life when she realizes that she no longer needs to prove anything to anyone, not her love, not her loyalty, not her intentions. She doesn't feel the urge to explain why she pulled away or clarify her silence. She understands that people who genuinely cared would have never put her in a position where she had to question her worth. Her emotional detachment isn't about revenge or resentment. It's about finally choosing herself over the chaos that once made her feel seen. She's no longer trying to be enough for someone else. She's learning to be more than enough for herself. This level of detachment isn't built overnight. It comes from wounds that taught her hard lessons. It comes from moments where she cried behind closed doors, hoping someone would see her pain. It comes from disappointment after disappointment, from giving her heart to people who only knew how to take. And now she doesn't give in the same way. She doesn't fall quickly or trust blindly. She studies people. She observes behavior. She believes in patterns, not potential. She listens more and speaks less. And through that silence, she has built an inner world of strength so firm, so unshakable, that no one can disturb her peace without permission. Men often don't see this transformation happening. They're still operating from the image they had of her when she was emotionally available, when she cared deeply, responded quickly, and loved fully. But now, she no longer mirrors their inconsistency with effort. She matches energy. If she's met with silence, she becomes quieter. If she's met with avoidance, she walks away. If she's met with confusion, she chooses clarity alone. It's not a game, it's a shift. A shift in energy, in standards and expectations. She's done explaining what should have been obvious. She's done being the only one trying. This shift changes everything because now she doesn't fear losing anyone. She fears losing her balance, her peace, her power. She's no longer seeking love that burns her out. She wants love that restores her. And until she finds it, she's not afraid to walk alone. This emotional independence is magnetic. It commands attention without demanding it. It invites respect without requesting it. It inspires others to either rise to her level or quietly exit her life. There's no in between. There's no room for half-heartedness in her world anymore. What men begin to feel is not just her absence, but their own inadequacy. They start to realize they never truly knew her, not because she was hiding, but because they never took the time to understand the depth of her heart. They thought her love would always be there. They assumed she'd always come back. But now the door is closed, not slammed, just quietly, firmly shut. And that stillness is more powerful than any confrontation ever could be. It forces reflection. It demands accountability. It makes them wonder how someone so open became so unreachable. She doesn't block or delete out of pettiness. She simply disappears from where she's not celebrated. She withdraws with grace, not bitterness. And that kind of goodbye leaves a mark. It's not loud, but it's final. It's not emotional, but it's unforgettable because men don't remember the drama. They remember the woman who chose silence over begging. They remember the one who didn't fight to stay, but chose to leave with dignity. They remember her not because she needed them, but because she stopped needing them at all. That detachment teaches her something vital. She's her own home. She's her own safety. She's her own peace. She doesn't chase closure from people who couldn't give her clarity while she was present. She creates her own closure by walking away from anything that made her feel less than she truly is. And from that space of wholeness, she builds a life that's rooted in self-worth, not external validation. She becomes emotionally self-sufficient, and that kind of woman can't be manipulated, controlled, or misled. She knows what love should feel like now. It should feel safe, consistent, honest, and mutual. It shouldn't leave her guessing, doubting, or overthinking. And until she finds that kind of love, she's not going to sacrifice herself trying to make broken connections work. She's not giving pieces of herself to those who only show up when it's convenient. She's not dimming her light to make others comfortable. She's rising, glowing, becoming unapologetically. And as she grows, the men who couldn't value her presence begin to feel the weight of her absence. They start to realize that her detachment wasn't coldness, it was courage. The courage to let go, to move on, to stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even hand her a bandage. Her strength is no longer measured by how much she can endure, but by how quickly she can walk away from anything that threatens her peace. And in that strength, she becomes untouchable. Not because she's hardened, but because she's healed. A woman who has reached the stage of true emotional detachment possesses a rare and profound strength. She's no longer defined by her past wounds or the pain she once carried. Instead, she's defined by her resilience, her ability to rise above circumstances that once threatened to break her. This transformation is subtle but powerful. It changes how she moves through the world and how others perceive her. She no longer needs constant reassurance or validation from others because she's cultivated an unshakable foundation within herself. This foundation is built on self-love, respect, and unwavering boundaries. Men, especially those who once took her for granted, find themselves drawn to this new version of her, but not for the reasons they might expect. It's not because she's trying to win them back or because she's desperate for attention. It's because she has become a symbol of self-respect and dignity. Her emotional detachment isn't about shutting people out. It's about creating space for herself. Space to breathe, to grow, to heal. And that space radiates an energy that's impossible to ignore. What's fascinating is that this kind of detachment doesn't make her distant or cold in the usual sense. Instead, it makes her present in a way that's intentional and grounded. She chooses where and with whom to invest her energy. She no longer spreads herself thin, trying to please everyone or mend relationships that only drain her. Her emotional availability is selective, not scarce. This selectivity is a magnet in itself because it shows she values herself and her time. Men notice this shift. They see a woman who knows her worth and refuses to settle for less than she deserves. This shift challenges the very dynamics that once existed in her relationships. Men who were used to easy access to her emotions and attention suddenly face a woman who won't respond to every call or message. They confront the reality that she's no longer waiting by the phone or rearranging her life to accommodate their needs. This forces them to reflect on their own behaviors. Some may feel confused, others regretful, and a few inspired to change. But regardless of their reaction, they can no longer take her for granted. Her emotional detachment also sharpens her intuition. She becomes a keen observer of character and intention. She reads between the lines and trusts her instincts more than empty promises. This heightened awareness protects her from falling into the same patterns of disappointment. She's learned that love without respect is not love at all. And because she values herself, she refuses to accept anything less than respect. This standard becomes non-negotiable, and anyone unwilling or unable to meet it gradually falls away. Men often mistake her detachment for disinterest or indifference, but it's neither. It's a deep self-care practice, a refusal to be emotionally exhausted by people who don't reciprocate her effort. She's not pushing them away out of spite. She's pulling herself closer to her own truth. And that truth is that her emotional energy is precious and finite. She chooses carefully who gets to share in it. This selective sharing creates a natural filter, attracting those who are capable of genuine connection and repelling those who aren't. As a result, the relationships she does maintain or build moving forward are healthier, more balanced, and more fulfilling. They're based on mutual respect, trust, and emotional availability from both sides. She no longer tolerates manipulation, inconsistency, or neglect. She expects partnership, not one-sided devotion. And because she embodies this expectation, she naturally attracts men who are emotionally mature and capable of meeting her on equal footing. This evolution also influences how she communicates. Her words are measured, her tone calm. She doesn't engage in needless arguments or drama. When she speaks, it's with clarity and purpose. She no longer feels the need to explain or justify her feelings to those who don't respect them. Her silence can be as powerful as her voice because it signifies boundaries firmly set and maintained. Men who try to push past those boundaries learn quickly that she is not someone to be swayed by pressure or guilt. Her emotional detachment paradoxically makes her more approachable, but only to those who respect her limits. It creates a space where genuine connections can flourish without the noise of neediness or desperation. She becomes a safe harbor for those who seek sincerity and depth. And that safety is rare in a world filled with emotional turbulence and uncertainty. At the core of this transformation is self-love. She learns to treat herself with the same kindness and respect she once gave to others without receiving in return. She prioritizes her mental and emotional health above pleasing others. This prioritization is revolutionary because it rewires how she interacts with the world. She stops tolerating disrespect and starts demanding kindness. She stops seeking approval and starts giving herself permission to thrive. Men who witness this change often feel a mix of admiration and regret. Admiration for the woman who refused to settle and carved out a space of peace and respect for herself. Regret because they realize they lost something precious by not valuing her sooner. But her detachment is not about punishing others. It's about protecting herself and honoring her journey. It's about living a life where she is whole, empowered, and free from the chains of unmet expectations. In the end, the woman who detaches emotionally is unstoppable. She moves through life with grace and confidence. She is no longer defined by her relationships, but by her independence and strength. Her heart is guarded not by walls, but by wisdom. And that wisdom makes her irresistible, not because she's hard to reach, but because she's impossible to ignore.